They stopped screaming first, not because they were spared, but because the air itself seemed to press the sound back down their throats. The horses refused to move. Steel shook in trembling hands. Men trained to face death stood frozen, staring ahead, unable to step forward and unable to look away. Something lined the road. Too many shapes. Too still. The wind shifted. A smell followed it, old iron, wet earth, and fear that had soaked into the ground long before anyone alive could remember. Boots sank slightly with every step, as if the land itself resisted being crossed. No one gave an order. No one needed to. They already knew this place was wrong. Above them, dark wood creaked softly, not from weight, but from time, from things left standing far too long, from a message that did not need words. Some soldiers closed their eyes. Others stared harder, as if refusing to accept what their minds were already screaming. This was not a battlefield. There were no clashing armies. No sounds of combat. Only silence. Deliberate. Absolute. And the feeling that someone was watching, not from the shadows but from the outcome. This was not chaos. This was arrangement. Every step forward felt permitted, allowed, as if crossing an invisible boundary that could not be uncrossed. One man dropped his weapon. It hit the ground too loudly. No one laughed. No one spoke. Because somewhere beyond the stillness, beyond the rows and the warning they carried, there was a certainty far worse than death itself. That whoever created this was not finished. And the question none of them dared to say aloud was the same one history would ask centuries later. What kind of ruler makes fear speak louder than blood? Mid-15th century Eastern Europe was a land caught between empires. To the south, the Ottoman Empire expanded relentlessly, organized, wealthy, and unstoppable. To the north and west, Christian kingdoms struggled to defend fractured borders. Between them lay Wallachia, a small, strategically vital principality pressed on all sides. Wallachia was not powerful, but it was important. Its forests, rivers, and mountain passes formed a natural barrier, one of the last lines of defense between the Ottomans and deeper Europe. Whoever controlled Wallachia controlled access, trade, and invasion routes. And Wallachia was afraid. Years of shifting rulers, betrayals, and foreign interference had turned loyalty into a liability. Nobles conspired openly. Allegiances changed overnight. Survival depended less on honor and more on timing. The population lived under constant uncertainty. Taxes were heavy. Armies passed through without warning. Villages learned to hide rather than resist. Power here did not last long. Rulers were crowned quickly and removed even faster. It was in this unstable world that a young prince returned from exile to reclaim his father's throne. He had been shaped not by comfort, but by captivity, not by mercy, but by observation. The Ottomans understood control. They understood fear. And so did he. When this ruler took power, Wallachia did not celebrate. It waited. Because something felt different. Orders became absolute. Punishments became final. Laws were enforced without negotiation. Corruption, once tolerated, was suddenly dangerous. Foreign observers began sending reports. Merchants whispered. Envoys wrote cautiously worded letters. The land had grown quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet. Trade routes were still open, but travelers moved faster. Soldiers obeyed more quickly. Nobles spoke less freely. There were no grand speeches. No promises of prosperity. Only a growing understanding that hesitation was now fatal. Wallachia was preparing for war, but not in the way wars were usually fought. This ruler was not interested in winning hearts. He was interested in controlling outcomes. And as tensions with the Ottoman Empire escalated, word began to spread beyond borders, stories of methods that did not rely on armies alone, stories of warnings left standing, messages carved into landscapes. No one could confirm them, but no one doubted them either. Something was being built here, not a fortress of stone, but a reputation. And once fear took root, it did not need explanation. The soldiers who served under him were not special men. They came from villages, farms, and towns hardened by uncertainty. Many had seen rulers rise and fall. Loyalty had taught them caution. Training was strict. Discipline was absolute. Orders were followed exactly, not because they were always understood, but because deviation carried consequences no one wished to test. Daily life was repetitive: marching, guard duty, inspections, silence. The same routines over and over drilled into muscle memory. But something had changed. Mistakes were no longer corrected. They were ended. No public speeches explained the new rules. Soldiers learned by observation, by absence, by noticing who no longer stood in formation. Fear did not come from shouting. It came from consistency. Weapons were maintained obsessively, armor inspected twice, units moved precisely. Even veteran fighters felt pressure they could not name. This was not chaos. This was control. At night, conversations were short, fires burned lower, laughter faded quickly. Men spoke in half-sentences, careful of what they allowed themselves to imagine. They had heard the stories. They did not know which ones were true. Their ruler did not visit camps often. When he did, there were no long addresses, just inspection, observation, silence. And yet everyone felt seen. Morale was strange. Fear existed, but so did certainty. Orders were clear, enemies were defined, failure was not ambiguous. The men understood one thing clearly: disobedience was not an option. And so when unusual instructions began to circulate, orders that did not align with normal military objectives, no one questioned them aloud. You followed, or you disappeared. The soldiers did not yet know what role they would play in history. They believed they were preparing for war. They did not realize they were becoming part of something far more permanent. The first sign was not violence. It was silence. A routine patrol failed to report back at the expected hour. No alarm was raised at first. Delays were common. Roads were poor. Weather shifted without warning. Messages were often late. But when the second patrol missed its signal, attention sharpened. Runners were dispatched. They returned with nothing to report. No tracks, no broken equipment, no sign of conflict, just empty roads that should not have been empty. Orders were given to wait. Waiting stretched longer than it should have. Nearby villages behaved strangely. Doors closed earlier in the evening. Market stalls packed up without explanation. People avoided eye contact. Questions were met with shrugs or silence. No one said anything was wrong. But no one said it was right either. At night, campfires burned lower. Conversations shortened. Even veterans, men who had marched through famine and war, found themselves listening more than speaking. There were sounds that did not fit. Not screams. Not fighting. Just distant movement where movement should not have been. Wood shifting in the wind where no structure stood. A sense of rhythm that did not belong to nature. Scouts reported unease without cause. Paths they had walked for years suddenly felt unfamiliar. Landmarks seemed closer or farther than memory allowed. Maps were checked. Then checked again. Nothing had changed. And yet something had. Messages sent to neighboring units received no reply, not refusal, not delay. Nothing. The absence became noticeable enough that officers stopped writing exact times in reports, only dates, as if precision itself had become unreliable. Then came behavior that could not be dismissed. Horses resisted certain roads. They slowed, veered, or refused to advance entirely. Handlers blamed fatigue, but even fresh mounts reacted the same way. Dogs would not follow scouts beyond specific points. They pulled back, whining, tails low, as if sensing a boundary invisible to men. The forests grew quiet. Not the calm quiet of rest, but the hollow kind, where even insects seemed absent. Wind moved through branches without carrying sound. Soldiers noticed they were being watched. Not directly, not visibly, just the persistent feeling of presence without direction. No eyes, no figures, just awareness. One evening, a supply wagon arrived missing its escort. The driver could not explain what had happened. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if choosing the wrong word might invite something back. He was dismissed. No charges were filed. No punishment issued. But no one volunteered for escort duty the next day. Orders from command arrived sealed, short, precise. Units were repositioned without explanation. Patrol routes were altered. Some roads were removed from rotation entirely. Still, no reason was given. Men began to notice patterns that were never discussed openly. The silence always began at dusk. The unease always intensified near the same stretch of land. Reports always stopped mid-sentence when referencing that direction. And yet, no official warning was ever issued. No alert. No evacuation. No declaration of danger. Just quiet compliance. The final sign came without ceremony. A single written order was delivered by hand. No insignia, no signature visible. It instructed a unit to move before dawn. No objective listed. No expected resistance noted. No contingency outlined. Just a destination. Men read it twice, then again. No one asked questions. They packed in silence, weapons checked, armor fastened, faces set. Whatever lay ahead was not unknown. It was simply unspoken. And as they formed up in the darkness, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was no longer preparation. This was approach. They moved before dawn. No horns. No banners. Only the soft rhythm of boots pressing into damp earth. The unit advanced along the assigned road in tight formation. The air was cold enough to sharpen breath, but not enough to fog vision. Trees leaned inward as the path narrowed, branches forming a corridor that swallowed sound. No one spoke. The only noises were leather shifting, metal settling, the occasional controlled exhale. Every step felt measured, rehearsed, yet unusually heavy, as if the ground resisted being crossed. The forest thinned ahead. Light began to seep through. And then movement slowed. Not because of an order. Because instinct took over. The first shapes appeared at the edge of visibility. Tall, vertical, unmoving. At a distance they could have been trees or posts or remnants of old fencing. No one reacted immediately, eyes narrowed, steps shortened. As the unit moved closer, perspective changed. The shapes did not blend into the landscape. They stood apart from it. Spacing was too precise, alignment too deliberate. Whatever these were, they had been placed carefully. The air changed. Sound faded as if absorbed. Even the forest seemed to pull back. Birds were absent. Wind passed through branches without carrying noise. The soldiers slowed to a halt. No command was given, but the formation broke naturally. Men drifted sideways, forward, backward, each trying to understand without being the first to say it aloud. The shapes resolved into lines. Rows. stretching farther than the eye could comfortably follow. Some men looked down, others stared forward, unwilling to let their gaze climb upward. A few removed their helmets, not in relief but in disbelief. No one approached the structures closely. No one needed to. This was not chaos. This was not aftermath. Everything stood exactly where it had been set. The road passed directly through the center of it, as if inviting passage, as if daring it. Horses refused to advance. They shifted, snorted, pulled away from the line, eyes wide. Handlers whispered, coaxed, tugged gently. Nothing worked. A weapon slipped from someone's grip. It struck the ground with a sharp metallic sound, too loud, too sudden. Every head turned. Nothing followed. No response. No movement. The silence pressed harder. Minutes passed. Time stretched unevenly. Some later swore it felt like seconds. Others claimed it lasted far longer. Watches were checked, then checked again. No one trusted them. A low creak echoed faintly. Wood settling. Old wood. It came from somewhere deep within the rows, not repeated, not answered, just enough to remind everyone that gravity still existed, that time was still moving, and that this had been standing for a while. Faces tightened, hands clenched around straps and hilts, not in preparation to fight but to anchor themselves. This was not an enemy force. There was nothing to attack, nothing to negotiate with. This was a message, and it had already been delivered. A few men began counting without realizing it, not numbers, spaces, gaps between the structures, the unnatural consistency of it all. Someone whispered a prayer. Another took a step back. No one mocked him. The officers exchanged looks, brief, wordless, the kind that carried weight without instruction. Then quietly, almost apologetically, the order came. Withdraw. Not shouted, not signaled, spoken just loudly enough to be heard. Relief passed through the unit, but it was thin, uneven, because retreat felt permitted, as if even leaving was something allowed rather than chosen. They turned slowly. No one ran. No one looked back twice. As they moved away, the shapes remained unchanged. No sound followed them, no pursuit, no sign that they had ever been observed. Yet every man felt watched. Not from behind, but from ahead. As if whatever had been arranged there had already anticipated this moment. The pause, the realization, the withdrawal. When the trees closed in again and the road curved out of sight, conversation did not resume. Breathing steadied, steps regained rhythm. But something had shifted. They had not been attacked. They had not been threatened. They had been shown. By the time they reached camp, dawn had fully broken. Fires burned. Other units moved about their routines. Everything appeared normal. No alarm was raised. No report was read aloud. The men dispersed silently, carrying with them the same unspoken understanding. Whatever this was, it was not the end. And it was not meant to be. The response did not come immediately. There was no alarm sounded when the unit returned, no emergency assembly, no raised voices. The men were dismissed quietly, instructed to remain available, and told to say nothing until further notice. That alone was unusual. Within hours, officers began requesting written reports, not verbally, on paper, carefully worded. Each man was told to describe only what he personally observed, nothing more. Times were omitted. Distances were estimated loosely. Numbers were discouraged. When the reports were collected, they were not read aloud. They were sealed and sent upward through channels that did not usually handle routine patrol findings. A second unit was dispatched along the same road later that day. They returned with no new observations. The area appeared unchanged, undisturbed, no signs of activity, no additions, no removals. It was as if the earlier presence had never occurred. Search parties expanded outward in widening patterns. They looked for tracks, supply movement, evidence of construction, or signs of enemy forces operating nearby. They found none. Local inhabitants were questioned next, separately, quietly, without uniformed escorts. Answers were inconsistent. Some claimed ignorance. Others said they had seen nothing unusual. A few hesitated too long before responding, then gave answers that matched too perfectly as if rehearsed. No accusations were made. No detentions followed. Interrogators noted changes in behavior rather than statements, avoided roads, lowered voices, reluctance to speak after sunset. These observations were logged, but never referenced again. Messages were sent to neighboring commands asking if similar sightings had been reported. Replies came back vague, polite, unhelpful. One mentioned environmental intimidation. Another cited unverified exaggeration. A third did not respond at all. As days passed, official interest appeared to decrease. Search operations were reduced, patrol routes adjusted. Certain areas were quietly removed from maps used for daily planning. No explanation was offered. A senior officer requested a consolidated report, one document summarizing all findings. It was never completed. Instead, the original reports were returned with sections marked through, entire paragraphs blacked out. Marginal notes replaced observations with neutral phrases like unconfirmed or not strategically relevant. Men who had been most shaken were reassigned, not punished, not promoted. Moved. Some were sent to distant posts, others placed on extended leave. A few simply vanished from rosters without explanation. No one asked where they went. Foreign envoys soon began asking questions. They had heard rumors, fragmented accounts carried by traders and travelers. They requested clarification, reassurance. They were told there had been no incident, nothing requiring comment. The answers satisfied no one. But they ended the questions. Internally, the matter was reclassified. Not as a threat, not as an engagement, but as resolved. Files were archived under unrelated headings. References to the location were removed from future operational documents. Training manuals were quietly updated to emphasize obedience, speed, and silence. The men noticed. They stopped talking about it, not because they were ordered to, but because every attempt to describe it felt inadequate, wrong, as if words weakened what had been experienced. Some began to doubt their own memory. Others refused to think about it at all. The land remained unchanged. The road still existed, but no unit was sent there again. And though no official explanation was ever recorded, one understanding settled heavily among those who had been involved. This was not a failure of intelligence. It was a decision. Someone had seen enough. And whatever conclusion had been reached, it was not meant to be shared. With no official explanation recorded, understanding fractured into theory. Not immediately, not openly, but in private correspondence, in foreign archives, and in margins of documents never meant to be read aloud, possibilities began to form. The first theory was the simplest: psychological warfare. According to this view, the incident was deliberate strategy, fear used as a weapon, not to destroy an army but to stop one from ever advancing, a display designed to be discovered, not fought. Supporters of this theory point to the precision, the placement, the restraint, no pursuit, no escalation. Just impact. But the theory breaks under one question. If this was strategy, why erase it from records? Military victories are usually celebrated. Psychological dominance is documented, studied, repeated. This was buried. The second theory suggests internal warning, that the display was not meant for foreign enemies at all, but for Wallachnia's own nobility, a message to those who had conspired, hesitated, or considered betrayal. A reminder of consequences without naming names. This would explain the silence, the lack of public acknowledgement, the quiet reassignment of witnesses. But this theory fails to explain the audience. Why position it where foreign patrols could find it? Why allow rumors to escape beyond borders? Warnings meant for insiders rarely travel so far. The third theory claims exaggeration over time. That what was encountered was real, but smaller, less organized. That fear magnified memory. That stories grew as they moved from soldier to scribe to traveler. History is full of such distortions. Yet multiple independent accounts, written in different languages from opposing sides, describe the same stillness, the same silence, the same unwillingness to detail specifics. Exaggeration tends to inflate. These records restrain. Then there is the final theory, the one never written directly, that the incident was not extraordinary because of what it showed, but because of how efficiently it worked. That no resistance followed, no invasion attempted along that route, no second display was ever needed. According to this view, the true reason the records disappear is not shame, but effectiveness. Some methods succeed too well. They create outcomes without conflict, compliance without negotiation, silence without force. And those are dangerous lessons, especially in a region already trembling under the weight of empires. Supporting this theory are the missing documents, reports referenced in later correspondence that no longer exist, names of witnesses crossed out in revised rolls, dates altered, locations renamed. Even centuries later, archivists note gaps, years where expected records simply end. As if someone ensured the details would dissolve, while the reputation remained intact. No theory stands alone. Each explains something and leaves something unresolved. What survives is not certainty, but consequence. Enemies hesitated, borders held, and a ruler's name transformed into legend. Not because historians embellished it, but because they never fully explained it. And perhaps that was intentional, because once fear becomes legend, it no longer needs proof. It only needs memory. History usually explains itself. Battles have dates. Victories have numbers. Defeats leave evidence. But some moments resist that structure. What happened here did not become a lesson taught openly. It became something quieter, something absorbed. Routes changed. Plans shifted. Enemies hesitated without knowing exactly why. No proclamation announced success. No monument recorded achievement. Only absence. Over time, the man at the center of it all became easier to mythologize than to understand. His name hardened into legend. His methods blurred into exaggeration, then symbolism. Calling him a monster was simpler. Calling him a story was safer. Because stories do not demand accountability. Yet beneath the layers of folklore, one fact remains difficult to ignore. Whatever occurred did exactly what it was meant to do. It required no repetition, no explanation, no defense. It ended something before it began. That may be why the truth was never fully written down, not because it was too cruel, but because it was too effective. Because acknowledging it would mean admitting that fear, when precisely controlled, could reshape history without a single battle being fought. And that idea is unsettling. So the records thin. The details vanish. And what survives is a shadow, just enough to influence behavior centuries later. Today we debate the legend, we argue about exaggeration, we search for proof. But perhaps we are asking the wrong question. Instead of asking what he did, we should ask why it still works, why his name alone still evokes hesitation, why silence follows it, why history chose not to clarify, but to remember. And so the final question remains unanswered. Was the real horror the cruelty we imagine, or the control we refuse to admit was possible? Backhand index pointing, down, share your theory in the comments.